Chapter 6, 36 hours later. So let me see if I got this straight, LaForge said, arms crossed over his chest as he eyed the nearly finished device the doctor was fussing over. The holodeck was bare at the moment, except for a single workbench in the center of the room. Over the past day and a half, various tools and devices ranging from handheld to massive structures had filled the room, offering a variety of different functions, some obvious to the Enterprise's chief engineer, and some quite obscure. At the end of all that work, though, there sat the device. The bottom segment of it looked like any piece of Starfleet tech, a British-grade beryllium alloy in the circular base with a glossy black control panel on the side. The interior was a mess of circuits and even some old-fashioned wiring, a jury-rigged amalgamation of several generations' worth of human and Federation technology. The truly alien component, what was locked at the base. What had been a hunk of dilithium crystal had metamorphosized due to the Dr. Crusher's guided treatment of it. Instead of a smooth, shimmering piece of crystal, it was now misshapen, pale white and orange, tiny and covered in tiny pockmarks throughout its surface. To LaForge's visor, the thing quite literally looked like nothing he had ever seen before. Your TARDIS doesn't work because it can't draw energy from our universe, LaForge started slowly, as if fully expecting to be corrected. And the reason it can't do that is because the materials it's constructed from originate from your own universe. And it has a quantum signature that leaves it fundamentally incompatible with this universe's time vortex. Good so far, the doctor chirped in distractedly. So this coral-looking stuff, his head tilted as he considered it, because it's made from raw materials in our universe, it'll draw the necessary power and let your TARDIS do whatever it is that your TARDIS does. In theory, the doctor chirped. Truth be told, never really attempted it before, never really had the chance, don't know if anyone ever has. Well, without your replicators, your dilithium crystals, I wouldn't have been able to jury-rig something to draw power on its own fuel supply before. And let me tell you, the last thing I want to do is give it my life force again. Blasted as I acted the first time, there's an absurdly risky thing to be tossing around. Now, because a TARDIS is grown from a species of pseudo-coral, I had hoped to find perhaps a planet with a similar supply, but lacking that, I decided I would create something close enough using a fifth-dimensional crystal lattice and make something very, very minor tweaks to its molecular makeup. Aren't you worried you're revealing the deep, dark secrets of time travel to me? LaForge asked slowly, brow lifting. Well, let me put it this way, the doctor chirped, clasping LaForge's shoulder with one hand and giving him a winning smile. If you can deduce the complexities and inner workings of a TARDIS from development to operation based entirely upon the words, she's grown from some sort of coral, then you most absolutely deserve a TARDIS. But I'm not necessarily holding my breath. In all honesty, there are quicker and easier, if not somewhat less effective, less accurate, and far more risky means of achieving time travel. According to your historical database, your Enterprise has figured out a few. We don't monopolize the concept. We just happen to find the most stylish way of going about it. LaForge couldn't help but grin at that, but before he could continue the conversation, a repressed yawn pushed out at him, his jaws straining and shifting as he tried desperately not to give out and let it in. Even though he was certain he had repressed it completely, the doctor didn't even look at him to notice, and the Time Lord's tongue tisked lightly. Oh, go to sleep already, he scolded, grinning. You've been up for 36 hours, which is very impressive for a human, but I promise I won't leave without saying goodbye first. All that really is left to do is some fine-tuning and tests before I plug this lovely little thing. So go! Rest! LaForge started to protest, but it was cut off by yet another yawn, so he had little choice but to surrender, laughing softly as he picked up his pad. All right. I'll go lie down for a few hours, but you better not do anything really, really exciting without me, all right? I shall do my very, very best, the doctor replied, hunched over the device. But since excitement is a habit of finding me, I can't make any promises. We'll see. Chuckling, Geordi rubbed his jaw, starting to move towards the exit. Good night, Doc. Once the holodeck doors had been shut behind him, the doctor drew in a deep breath, eyes narrowing. He had been waiting for the chief engineer to depart for some time, though it wasn't because he didn't enjoy the man's company. He had a sharp mind, incredibly so, and the Time Lord had actually been careful not to be too liberal with the flow of information. But something had been bothering him in the back of his mind for some time, and he wanted some privacy to confirm it. "Computer!" he called out. "Create a data display on the far wall and access the historical data I was recording earlier. Change search parameters to between the mid-20th and mid-21st century. Chronological order, usual rate." The far wall of the holodeck shimmered, a massive monitor appearing. A moment later, a series of news clippings, historical files, and other bits of information began to fit onto the screen at a quick pace. Though nowhere near the rate of a certain android officer could absorb, it still passed by far more rapidly than any human could track, dozens of incident reports and articles passing within minutes. At first, the doctor only paid it a brief amount of attention, keeping an eye on them as he continued to tinker with his newest toy. But as time passed, his work on it began to slow and then stop altogether until his full attention was locked on the display. With every minute that passed, his expression grew more and more grim, his eyes more troubled. His fingers began to tighten around the edges of the workbench and his lips pursed, weight shifting restlessly from one foot to the other. He felt trapped, cramped. He needed to get out of this room, get some air. Here he was on a starship wanting some fresh air. No, not that. He wanted to be closer to the stars. As it turned out, the place to find this view was a lounge that the computer had conveniently called 10 Forward. The doctor found it quickly enough, a single security officer who stood guard on the holodeck escorting him there, before leaving him to go to the bar. Appreciative of the privacy, the doctor was quick to claim a seat closest to the vast windows, hoping that maybe if he let himself get lost in that view, he could get his mind off the troubling things he had dug up. But that didn't last. He had brought up a pad with him, containing the same information he'd been reading earlier, and as much as he wanted to drink in the starscape, his gaze gradually dropped from the electronic device until he was just as immersed in it as he had been in the holodeck. So focused was he even lost track of the passage of time. Yet another first. "Hello there." It wasn't until the voice sounded that the doctor realized that someone had approached his table. Glancing up, startled, the doctor frowned a little at the dark-skinned woman dressed in blue, sweeping robes and a truly enviable hat to boot. Clearing his throat, he licked his lips and glanced about the room, as if hoping that she was maybe talking to someone else. No such luck. The lounge was almost certainly deserted. "Hello," the doctor wanted to say, but he was busy. Wanted to ask her to leave, but, well, he was a guest. "I'm the doctor." "So I've heard," the woman replied. "Pleased to meet you. I'm Guinan." "Guinan?" the doctor echoed, then frowning. "You're not on the crew roster. What is it that you do here?" "Well, I guess you could say I'm the hostess," she replied, hands vanishing into the voluptuous sleeves of her robe as she sat across from him, leaning forward and lowering her voice in a conciliatory murmur. "I serve drinks, I tend bar, and I listen. And I have to say, in all the time I've done it, I don't think I've ever seen someone with so much to hear that I've heard by so few. Thought maybe you had some things you'd like to get off your chest." "Get some things off my chest, you say," the doctor muttered, returning his attention to the pad with a snort. "Do you have a few 100 years?" "I think I could spare the time," she replied, deadpanned. The doctor's eyes flicked upward at that, startled, and then narrowed just a little, as if staring past her, through her, into something that only he could see. That she wasn't human was only a mild surprise to him, and the fact that her race wasn't familiar to him at all wasn't surprising at all. What did catch his interest was that from her he sensed that he had something he hadn't felt in years, countless years. A kinship. The corner of his mouth quirked upwards into a small, sad smile. "Very old, very wise, very kind, very lonely," she finished, the very same smile mirrored on her own face. "Somehow you seemed familiar." The doctor's arms folded across his chest. He leaned back in his seat, considering her for a long moment before asking, "I don't suppose you're a Time Lord that forgot to stare into the untempered schism?" "I'm afraid not," she replied. I don't suppose you're an Inalurian with a few redundant organs? He actually chuckled at that for a moment, a good, cleansing laugh under his breath. No, I doubt it, though with these alternate universes, who could say for sure? We could be fifth cousins, 30 times removed. Guinan smiled, then gestured to the pad that he'd held, brow furrowing curiosity. Most people come in here for the view. What is it that has you so fascinated this past hour that your gaze hasn't wandered? Historical information, the doctor replied, waving the pad slightly, and then trying not to show that he wasn't too surprised at how much time had passed. On this United Federation of Planets, and on an Earth's development between the 20th and current times, I had hoped I could isolate a point that could have told me when your universe differentiated from mine. But there are too many unexpected variables in this galaxy alone. For one thing, no sign of the Sontarans, the Daleks, not even a mention of the Silurians, and they were Earth's original occupants. Instead, there are species I never even had a hint of. Others seem almost parodies of the threats from my universe. Don't get me started on the Borg, for instance. Suggesting the differences happened long, long ago, Guinan replied. Untold eons. Yes, and once my TARDIS is operational, I intend to pop over then and see what's what, the doctor muttered. Until then, I've been restricted my attention to the Earth herself, and I'm, if anything, all the more troubled. What have you found? My handiwork, he replied. Well, the other me. This universe is me. Guinan's brow arched. So this universe has a doctor, then? Strange there's no record or stories that ever made it to public consciousness. Actually, the doctor replied a bit grimly, I think the term is had. This universe had a doctor. I see evidence of some interventions, disasters averted. Some of them I actually remember quite clearly from my own universe. Others just seem like something I would have done, but too few of them. At a certain point in my own personal timeline, one I had just yet to pinpoint, there's nothing. It is difficult to tell when, of course, with time being rewritten again and again, but sometimes in my past, this doctor simply seemed to vanish. Perhaps he died, perhaps he decided to stop interfering in humanity's affairs, but for whatever reason, the Earth was bereft of a doctor. And yet, you're almost disappointed to see that humanity's done so well for itself without him. Guinan finished for him. Without you. Not disappointed, I'm not quite that monstrous, the doctor replied wryly, then shrugged and leaned back, ruffling his hair, and then leaning forward, an elbow resting on the table as the other hand gestured emphatically. But it does make me wonder if at some point all my cavorting around trying to keep the Earth from being blown to dust held the planet back in a sense, keeping it from developing as it should have, standing on her own 2 feet. The Third World War I read about was terrible, terrible tragedy, something I probably would have prevented entirely had I been there. Aren't you getting a little bit too full of yourself? Guinan interjected softly. The doctor's brow crooked, a wan smile on his face. Am I? Guinan considered that and then shook her head, teeth flashing a smile. On second thought, maybe not. Yes, well, if I had succeeded in stopping the Third World War, the doctor threw up his hands, there possibly wouldn't have been a first warp flight, no first contact, no Federation. Humanity would have continued to plod along in a state of tension and infighting, and I probably would have ended up having to save them from the Romulans next. Then the Klingons, the Borg, countless threats, countless invasions I would have done everything to prevent, and in doing so, denied humanity the opportunity to learn from each experience, from each loss, and grow as a people. This Federation is the very epitome of what I dreamed humanity would become, a dream they often just seem so short of reaching. Perhaps because of me. Perhaps, Guinan replied agreeably, her eyes narrowing a little. So what keeps you from giving them a chance? Honestly, the Time Lord frowned pensively. Fear of failure. Yours or theirs? Aren't they one and the same? The doctor chuckled very quietly, very tired. Mine, as a result of theirs. What happens if I give them free rein, count on them to save themselves, and they can't? What if the next big threat that I refuse to interfere in wipes them out? What if yet another race, because of me, is scattered to oblivion? Another? Guinan echoed. The doctor fell silent, head bowing, jaw tightened. It was the same wall that he had erected to Counselor Troy that had pushed out that painful spot, an evasion. The Betazoid had changed the topic, not wanting to alienate him. The El Alurian simply watched him for a long moment, head tilting as if hearing something without an overt sound, and then, after the long silence stretched into full minutes, Guinan spoke again, her voice soft and gentle. Captain Picard and I have been friends for quite some time. We confide in each other. A few years ago, he spoke to me of a being that the Enterprise had encountered, living in a destroyed colony. He looked human at first, but it proved to be a creature of incredible power, incredible wisdom, and it was a being that had destroyed an entire race. In a moment of anger, an act for which it was wrought with guilt and regret. Somehow, when I look at you, I remember that story. I don't see how. My crime is far worse, the doctor replied, snorting, his eyes dark, only half aware of what he was saying. Lashed out in anger, anyone can do that. Dishes break, furniture breaks, sometimes people, but always in the heat of the moment. There was no rage to excuse what I did, no heat. I knew exactly what I was doing when I did it. It was precise, calculated, and in no way affected by anger or disgust. Though I well should have been. Worst by far, was that it wasn't just some race, some strangers on a distant planet far removed from home. It was my race, my planet, my home. It takes something pretty serious to feel that way about your own people, Guinan replied mildly. Something worse than to know that you should be feeling it, even if you don't. Yes, well, the doctor hesitated for just a moment, one last niggling barrier keeping his secret safe until it gave way, and he let the darkness pour out. They left me with little choice, you see, a loathsome plan made by the Council in hopes of ending the great Time War in victory. Only it would have been a victory for us, our race. Everyone else, every enemy, civilization, everything in the universe would have been eradicated to achieve this victory. And the gain for us, a life of incorporeal existence as echoes, ghosts, remnants of what we once were. Final sanction, he called it. A soft, clean name for something drenched in so much blood. So I weighed the options. I looked at the Daleks, beings of pure genocidal evil, dedicated to the elimination of all life forms that not itself, Daleks. Then looked at my own kind, and could not for the life of me see the difference anymore. It was then I acted. It was then that I killed them all. Daleks, Time Lords, they burned together, bound to the end by brothers for their wretched aims. So much destruction, so much death. All because I tried to do the right thing. The doctor's jaw tightened. Because I thought I was righteous. I wonder, did it make me any different from the rest of them? His thoughts were disrupted by the oddest thing. Physical contact. Eyes focusing, he saw Guinan's hand resting on his own, just the tips of her fingers pressing lightly on the back of his hand. But something about the gesture was eminently comforting. When he met her gaze, he saw no disgust, no judgment, just quiet acceptance. It nearly broke his heart. Who can say for sure? Guinan replied, as if given a casual shrug. All I do know is that you did what you could, what you had to do. Who's to say humans wouldn't have died out if our doctor hadn't been there at least some of the time? Who's to guess which species-ending disaster would have been bearable to them and which wouldn't? No matter what happened, no matter the cost, you still did everything you could to protect them. You should remember that, because sooner or later you're going to come face to face with exactly what you never wanted to become. Oh? The doctor's brow quirked as he tried to snort. What's that? The man who stopped trying. The doctor was actually stunned by that, his gaze falling away from the bartender, flicking away as he thought to himself. But before sighing softly, climbing to his feet, and for the first time in hours allowing himself to wince at the aches of his bruised limbs. Thank you, Guinan, but I need to get back to work. Of course. Thanks for visiting, Guinan replied, remaining in her seat as he began to move away, but then she spoke again, stopping him in his tracks. Doctor, can I ask you one last question? Turning towards the Elulurian, the doctor nodded, face unreadable. Anything. Well, your actions destroyed your people to save others. You must have been very, very lonely for a long time afterwards, and I don't think there's a part of you that regrets it. So if you went back to that moment, faced the same decision, knowing all you know, feeling as you do, would you kill them all again? The doctor's lips spread into a little sad smile, and as he turned away to leave once more, he called back over his shoulder. In a heartbeat. So you spoke with him, then? Guinan smiled a little at the sound of Picard's voice. She knew he was probably keeping tabs on the Time Lord's movements, just as she knew he would be coming down here soon or after learning of the man's visit to Ten Forward. Although Counselor Troy was generally the one Picard turned to for counsel, and for good reason, he had certainly learned to appreciate Guinan's particular perceptions. And when she turned to glance at him, she realized that he probably needed some advice himself. I know what you're going to ask me, Guinan said, sighing softly as she got to her feet. Is he dangerous? Yes. More than you could imagine. Is he a threat to you, to this crew? No. In fact, from the guilt that's pouring out of your brow right now, it looks like we're more of a threat to him than he is to us. Care to fill me in? Picard's mouth thinned a little, and he turned to her, about to communicate from Starfleet, the confidential orders, everything. I won't let it stand, Picard murmured, after the story had been concluded, his head shaking. I fight this Guinan. I won't simply let them abduct him. You really shouldn't bother. Picard snapped up at those words, his eyes widening with nothing but shock. Beg pardon? You really shouldn't bother. Guinan repeated, hand waving as she moved to collect a pair of discarded glasses. It's your waste of your time, Captain. Looking out for one alien with an odd box by complaining to people who really don't care. I would make them care, Picard snapped. I'm surprised at you, Guinan. I could file a protest. Follow the Intrepid back to Earth. Take this all the way to the Federation Council if need be. Beat down every door and shake every stoogey, settled desk-bound bureaucrat of an admiral by the lapels until I made them see what they're doing is fundamentally wrong. You could, but it wouldn't matter, she continued. By the time your protests were borne fruit, by the time the Federation Council ruled in your favor, the Doctor would have been lost, swallowed up in less than acknowledged elements of Starfleet. You hear 100 heartfelt apologies, 1,000 expressions of regret for this misunderstanding, this tragedy, but he'd still be gone, and you'd never ever find him again. At least not until they're done with him and tossed him away what's left. They would have what they came for, and nobody would be able to take the blame for it. Picard, who had been shaking his head throughout most of her speech, found his denials fading as each of her words sunk deeper and deeper into his mind. His expression, which had been stony and determined, grew more troubled with each passing moment. By the time she had finished, his head was bowed, his face was filled with equal parts anger and dejection. So, Guinan continued, moving back to the bar, as much as you want to raise your protests, file your appeals, work through the proper channels with the proper forms, it's all just going to be pointless, a pointless waste of time. So as I said, you really shouldn't bother. Something about her tone tugged at his instincts, and when Picard glanced up, he saw that Guinan was watching him quite intently. You're right, Picard said, and his confusion was replaced by a spark of understanding. The proper channels. All of that would be a waste of time and effort. Wouldn't accomplish anything at all. The Jean-Luc Picard I know never wasted his time on something he knew wasn't going to work, Guinan said softly. Even if his instincts as an officer told him that it's only legitimate path available to him. And the Federation I first encountered many, many years ago would never have met refugees with confinement and interrogation. Thank you, Guinan. Picard nodded slowly, tugging at his uniform top, eyes glittering with half-formed ideas. You've given me a lot to think about. Hey, Guinan shrugged, leaning idly on the bar as she watched the captain stride out, that small, enigmatic smile of hers tugging at her lips. I'm just trying to save you some time.